good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everyone. Uh, this is our second engineering leaders panel. We had the first one in October. So the agenda is quite simple. We'll have a quick introduction by indoors. Then all the panelists can introduce themselves, and then we can get to the panel discussion. Right? Some housekeeping stuff before we start that. So you will get a chance, all the audience will get a chance to ask the questions at the end. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, please put them on the Zoom chat, and Antonio will be collating those questions and we'll ask them at the end to the panelists. Second, if you're not speaking, please keep your mic on mute. You can keep your camera on, that's not a problem. Just stay on mute. Awesome. Great. So yeah, we have, for those who are from outside the community, we have a very great and thriving engineering leaders community. We discuss a wide range of topics. We do weekly roundtables with all the engineering leaders. And people like Chris, Smruti, Nick, Chapo, they have been with us since the beginning. They have attended multiple roundtables until now, and we enjoy having discussions with them. These engineering leaders, they come from right from US, UK, Europe, and Singapore. We also have a few people from India actually in this community. We do about 4 to 6 roundtables every week. We had taken a break during the holidays, and we'll start them again from next week. We have more than 200 engineering leaders in the community, and these people, they represent more than 150 companies. And these are really world-class companies. You name the company: Amazon, Stripe, Just Eat, Immersive Labs, you just name it, and we have that company in the community. It's a really awesome community. We discuss a wide range of topics like how to build engineering, high-performance engineering teams. What are the engineering and product operating models? What is inner sourcing? How to coach and mentor your team, and a lot more topics. And we have these panel discussions on a quarterly basis, where we go into the depth of a few questions, and we have 3 to 4 panelists on the screen. So indoors, we are a company, as most of you know. We are a coding assessment platform. We help companies hire software developers. We help them upskill software developers, and we also conduct online hackathons with companies. So we have some great panelists today: Smruti, Chris, and Nick Gupta from Amazon. So Smruti is from Stripe. I'll ask them to introduce themselves now. So yeah, who wants to go first? Maybe Chris, you can go first.
Awesome. So welcome everyone. Really pleased to be on the panel today. My name is Chris Newton, currently the VP of Engineering at Immersive Labs, where I've been for about 2.5 months. I've been working in technology for about 18 years. 5 years prior to Immersive Labs, I was at Just Eat, now justeattakeaway.com, which I'm sure many people will know, and left there the last 2 years as head of engineering. I care deeply about people. I care deeply about technology, but always in that order. So it's always about the people. And yeah, just really delighted to talk about some of the topics on the discussion for today.
Great. So Chris has a background in working in high growth environment companies, and he'll be answering questions related to that. Yeah. Great. So next up is Smruti. Introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, welcome. I'm Smruti Patel. I am head of LEAP, which is Latency, Efficiency, and Performance, and the data platform infrastructure at Stripe. I've been here for about 3 years. Before Stripe, I was at VMware for about 11 to 12, leading different enterprise products. And super excited to be here with this set of folks. Like Chris, I love bringing a diverse, excited, skilled, and motivated set of people together to solve business problems through exciting tech.
Yeah, and Smruti is really passionate about building high-performing teams and also about coaching and mentoring her team. And she has some really amazing insights on building a talent pipeline. So we have had some amazing discussions with her. I hope we can get to that today. Great. Thank you, Smruti. And last but not the least, the man of the hour is Nick Gupta. Hey, Nick.
Yeah, the pressure is on. I'm falling in the footsteps of two people who have really set the bar high. Hi everyone, I'm Nick Gupta. I am with Amazon in London, specifically within Prime Video. I have been with Amazon just over 3 years now. And before Amazon, I've worked across various other sectors and industries, including finance and whatnot. And like Chris and Smruti, I'm a big believer in sort of starting with people and customers first, as we would say at Amazon, and then working backwards towards business. I'm really passionate about growing talent, mentoring others, and generally paying it forwards. I'm also a sort of a techie, geeky person at heart. I love to read whatever I can get my hands on, as you can probably see in the background. This is not for show, by the way. It's real. And so I'm very happy to take your questions and learn myself here as we go along. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Nick. So Nick is one of the people in the world who has made the lockdown least bit bearable for all of us, right? Working at Prime Video. Thanks for that, Nick. And Nick, by the way, do you know there's a service which actually delivers books so that you can put it on your Zoom back, actual books.
You can quiz me on some of the books here if that helps. Go on.
It's a SaaS platform, by the way. Yeah. It's doing well. Great. Thanks for that, everyone. Cool. So now let's get into the questions. So the first question is for you, Smruti. So you're working at Stripe, and high performance is something which is really familiar to you, right? So you manage queries from thousands and thousands, if not millions, of teams and softwares every day. So what are your secrets of building a high-performing engineering team, and what makes such a team stand out?
I love this question. I thrive on this one. So thank you so much for giving me this. So typically when we talk about high performance, a naive view could be, we see a bunch of developers burning the midnight oil, shipping faster, shipping more. But over the last 2 decades, I've worked as an engineer, manager, and recently an organizational leader. And through all this, I've led diverse teams of, like I said, smart, talented engineers, and shipped both infrastructure as product for enterprise customers and now infrastructure as platform for some of our internal users at Stripe. And through all this, I've learned 2 really fundamental important concepts, which probably are known to most of you, but for me, it was like a very aha kind of moment. One was motivation, which is engineers basically lack motivation. They're here to do their best stuff. So how do we as leaders then create those environments where they can come together and sort of work their magic? And this is where the second concept around systems thinking by Donella Meadows sort of blew my mind about a decade ago, which was identifying the set of elements, how they connect with each other, and the purpose of all this. So when you zoom out and you say, okay, what does high performing look like? Basically, there is more to it than just the tactical stuff of agile and story points or sprints and OKRs. So to me, what stands out from over my decade of leadership is 3 things: business success, individual success, and team success. And what I mean by this is, in terms of business or users, it's the precision and impact in terms of like, what are you trying to ship and why? In terms of the team, these are things where it's like, how well are your individuals actually working together, and how effectively are they shipping their code with agility and quality? And you slow down that to the atom of the individual. It's about how engaged and motivated are individuals, how well are they growing and stretching themselves. So to me, at the heart of all of this, business, team, and individual success is how do we as leaders create and foster those inclusive environments, which is basically based on psychological safety, radical candor, and at the individual level growth mindset. And that's where I've seen most of the high performing teams sort of nailing it.
That's a really great answer. Can you actually talk more about the engagement and motivation part? So how do you sustain that motivation over a long period of time, right? Suppose you have an engineer who has been working in your team for maybe 3 years, 4 years now. How do you sustain that motivation? Do you give them different tasks? Do you change their roles quite often? Yeah.
Right. So this is where I think there are 2 things. One is understanding individual career aspirations come to mind. And the second thing is systemically, is the system and the environment set up for success? Where is the team scope set up where the engineer can grow? Like for mid to senior level engineers, what is their career path? So some of the things in terms of sustaining motivation is through one-on-one, sitting with each, figuring out where are they in their lives, right? Do they want to sort of fire on all their cylinders, or like last year, because of COVID, a lot of us has seen our lives disrupt, in which case, some of us have actively chosen to take that step step back from work. So how do you then understand where is each individual in their respective lives and what do they want from their professional career over the year to come? So I work with my engineers, my managers to sort of sit down and create that career growth plan about like, what does your 1 year look like? And for some, it could be in terms of an up level or a promotion. For some, it could be like, hey, I want to pick up a new skill. And for some, it could just be like, hey, I really want to punch up, stretch myself, stretch but not break. And what are the kind of projects that are coming along? What are the initiatives coming along? And ideally, I can support those opportunities within the teams I have. But I've also had those conversations with engineers to say, hey, the team is in the state, it's got some stuff to deliver because we're on the hook for what the business needs. So I might not have an opportunity like this. And let's then consider internal mobility. And Stripe is very big about internal mobility, where we want engineers to take what they learn from one area and take it to a different team. So in terms of sustaining motivation, I think the key thing for us managers is to be on top of how do individuals see themselves growing. And if they don't have an idea of what that looks like, sort of asking those probing questions and understanding what might set them up for success, and then making sure that they actually have a plan to carry that forward.
You know what? I'm going to echo that. So what Smruti said is absolutely spot on, and it's one of the key things that I see a lot of managers, especially early managers, miss, is when you sit with an engineer and you say, right, let's see what growth means for you. That's when people get to thinking that, okay, what do I want to do? What growth means for me? And so I think Smruti is bang on. This is what I also do. So I would basically sit with whether it's an engineer or a manager reporting into me, I would sit and say, right, let's see, tell me, what does the next 6 to 12 months look like for you? What does next 18 to 36 months look like for you? And then what does 5 year and beyond look like for you? So you write those horizontals, and then I will help you fill in the steps you need to take. And how will I help you take those steps to meet that goal? It's really, I think you're spot on. This is a very valuable piece of advice for everyone.
Great. Thanks for the insights, Nick and Smruti. So now coming to you, Chris. So Chris, you have worked at Just Eat and you have seen the team and the whole company grow, from countries to continents and from one product to another, right? So you have seen it grow to multiple verticals. So in such a high growth environment, how do you handle alignments and prioritization between teams? How do you prioritize the tasks between teams in such an environment?
So it's really hard. Like this is one of the hardest things. As you grow, especially as you grow really quickly, and the complexity of communication starts to build up, then yeah, maintaining that alignment and prioritization across teams is really hard. But I think there's a few kind of grounding principles that if you get right, will really help you with that. So the first thing is starting with vision. So it all needs to have a really clear, inspiring, well understood company vision that is really guiding every department in the business, not just product and tech, but you're talking about the whole wider business. There has to be a direction, a clear direction for the company. Then underpinning that is going to be the product and tech side of things. You have your product vision. So what are we trying to achieve for our customers through the product? And really for me, you then have an engineering vision and strategy that underpins that. And really that's about complementary to the product vision, and it supports it. It shouldn't be divergent in any way. Everything that we're doing on that engineering vision strategy lines up to delivering the best outcomes for customers through the product vision. And in terms of sharing that and communicating it, it's really a case of over communication. There's not enough times that you can talk about strategy and vision to your teams, and you have to say it and say it and say it again until it really begins to resonate and really becomes then just a guiding principle for everything that you do. So that's great. You know where you're going, you know where the team is going, individuals know how they contribute towards that. How do you actually get there? And that's really where objectives and goal setting is key. As you start to scale out, it's really key that you have very transparent goals. Now, if you're using a cascading objective framework, such as OKRs, a lot of people are familiar with objective key results. If you use them well, they can be a really powerful tool in terms of getting that prioritization and getting alignment. If you're having, especially when you're using cascading OKRs, so there's a top level objective. Let's say I have an engineering objective. There's a set of key results underneath that objective, but then ownership of the key result is either given to a team or an individual engineer, and they will then take that as an objective for themselves and define their own key results under that. So they can see there's a linear setup between what they're doing on the ground and how that then ties back up to that top level objective. And if that's done well, it works really well. If it's not done so well, as I've seen at certain places, I'm not going to name any names, then it can be quite disruptive. Certainly when you have misaligned goals between different parts of the organization. So yeah, really clear and transparent goal setting is super key. As anyone who's been in a company that grows from, say, like startup to scale up phase will know, one of the things that is super challenging is communication as you grow. The complexity of communication just gets harder and harder, but outward communication from the team becomes more important. Communication of progress, especially, so other teams knowing transparently how you're progressing with the piece of work that you're doing. And that then kind of flows into dependency management, which gets harder as you grow. And therefore that communication again becomes more important. And scheduling becomes a thing. You may need to look at putting in more process, sadly, for some people as you begin to grow, because there's just a need to have some kind of structure in place to enable decision-making, to enable sequencing of work, to deliver the best outcomes for the business as efficiently as possible. You kind of get into the realms of more program management as well to get that alignment, but obviously in an agile environment. And that program management aspect of it really helps with the outward communication. I think one of the things that I've seen and observed since lockdown, certainly in the UK, but obviously all over the world, is the intra-team and intra-department communication has really suffered, which, going back to the kind of question around alignment and prioritization, has been a pain point. I think inter-team, where you've got your Slack channel, you've got your daily stand-ups, you've got regular touch points and you're conversing regularly, then that's all good. But it's that intra-team and that intra-department that I think has really suffered. You don't get the informal conversations that would happen in the kitchen or the water cooler moments. So I think as a leader, trying to make sure you have the right communication channels in place for that to support intra-team, people are talking to the right people at the right times. That's super key. And I've really seen that suffer more than anything, I think, in terms of how teams communicate. And that whole piece around outward communication linked to alignment and prioritization has been a struggle, unless you have a way of transparently communicating what the business is up to and what each team is doing and how their work contributes.
Great answer. Inspiring vision at the company level. And I really understand your point about OKRs. So essentially, you have OKRs at the team level, and all of them essentially are aligned at the top level towards the company vision, essentially, right?
Yeah, and I think it's really hard to do OKRs well, and it takes time. And I think what some companies do is they'll try them for maybe a 2 quarters, 3 quarters, think they're not working, and then we'll give up. But actually, it's if you constantly refine it, if you iterate on the process, if you keep talking about it, if you potentially bring in outside help, get someone to come and coach you on it, then when you do it right, the power is really valuable. So yeah, I've seen it work well, and when it does work well, it's great. If it doesn't work so well, then yeah, it can be more of a hindrance.
Hey, Chris, I was going to ask you, like, what does bad OKRs look like? Or do you have some examples of how, you have a vision, but the OKR sort of just did not get you there? And I'd love to hear if you've got any examples or, any stories there that you could share.
So I've got 3 anti-patterns that I've seen with OKRs. So the first one is where you have an OKR at the top level of the company, and then you have this massive void and gap between the teams who then set their own OKRs. So you're kind of missing this middle layer that ties the things together. So you miss that lineage back up to the top level OKR of the company. So I've seen that there's just that disconnect. So that's one anti-pattern I've seen. The other one I've seen is where people are using OKRs in different parts of the business, but they're misaligned in terms of what they're trying to achieve, because they're not maybe using them at the company level, but this department's using it and this department is using it. But yeah, they're not aligned, or they're working at cross purposes. So that doesn't help. And then the third anti-pattern is just how you define OKRs, how you define an objective, how you define key results. And I think looking at the true essence of what you're supposed to be putting into an objective, this kind of aspirational goal, and then a set of bets of how you're going to get there. Quite often you see them defined badly. It's like deliver this feature, deliver this feature. And I think that there is an art to writing OKRs effectively, and for the ability for those to then cascade down. That is a skill, and it's something that you have to be taught how to do it, or you have to train yourself how to do it. You have to practice. You have to do it a few times to get better at it. I'm definitely not an expert. I'm constantly trying to get better. But yeah, it's a hard thing to get right.
It's some of these OKRs. It resonates with me as well. We are insanely passionate about OKRs and sort of metric-driven goal setting at Amazon. And without going into much specifics, I think over the last year, in the third to fourth quarter at Amazon, the business that I'm a part of, I think we spent about 2 months just getting our matrix right. literally just figuring out what are the right metrics we should track worldwide. Why are they instrumented? Are they reliable? Are they the right metrics? How would we validate that? And so, to what Chris said, and what sort of Smriti's question as well, it is absolutely essential to get that framework built before you start sort of delving into what projects are we going to do and why. So absolutely spot on there, Chris.
Great. Thanks for the insights, Chris. Now, Nick, coming to you, we have a very interesting question for you. The scary T word. So, how do you convince business stakeholders to prioritize technical debt? How do you convince them that okay, tech debt is important and we need to spend some time on the from the engineering team to solve this?
Yeah. Okay. This is a stitch up. I think interesting question, absolutely, and I think it's a very practical problem that every engineering function faces, and it starts by so if your question is, how do you get business teams to back you up when you want to invest in resolving tech debt? I think it starts by first convincing yourself what tech debt is and whether it's worth resolving. Um, a mess is not a tech debt. So if there's a mess in the code which was um, created with the best intentions because that is what we knew best at that time, it's a mess. It's not a tech debt. Um, the right mental model to think of tech debt is like a borrowed money. It's a loan. So you're borrowing money to do things today that you can't do otherwise. So you're taking a shortcut. Um, and as you borrow money, until you pay it back, you will keep paying interest on that. And so if you could quantify that in trust, in terms of going back to what Chris was so articulating so well, if you can articulate that interest in terms of how it hampers organizational OKRs, that's the key, or your team's OKR. So if you can demonstrate how by not solving a particular problem, whether it's hard coding, whether it's a manual process, whether it's a sort of a badly written piece of code, how it decreases your overall agility, how it leads to churn on the team because you must do that manual process every X days or X weeks or X months, or how it leads to operational load in the sense, how it leads to an increasing volume of on-call tickets or high severity incidents. That's the key. So spend some time. And again, as I said earlier on, we at Amazon do this passionately a lot. Over the last couple of weeks, the teams I manage have been really looking at all the manual processes we do, and sort of trying to figure out how much does that slow us by. We are also looking at cost to the customers of some of these things. So when you have a manual process, because there's a shortcut you took to go to market, eventually manual errors will come in, and you would get things wrong, and you would either send the wrong messaging out to customers, or you would make some public facing mistake, and that will come at a cost, whether it's a reputational cost to your organization or a very tangible material business cost to the organization. Take all of that data, all of those dimensions, distill them in a crisp summary of the impact to customers, to business, to your agility, to your operational cost, your quality of life. Look at 360-degree surveys if your organization runs them, and find the patterns which talk about why an engineer or a particular team says their life is not good because of all the operational costs they have to bear. Build that story around, convince yourself that it's the right story to look at, you are looking at the right metrics, and just present that analysis back to your stakeholders. And if you do that well, you would see the stakeholders being very receptive. The other mental model we adopt at Amazon is we acknowledge that no team, no company, no organization is perfect, and there will always be tech debt which is unknown, which we don't know about, and we will discover as we go along. And so what we do is we strike an agreement with the business at times that over this year we will block 10% of our capacity to address those things as they come along. So here are the known things which we know, and we are now blocking 10% of our capacity to address these known things because of this impact assessment that we presented to you, and you agree it's valid. But we are also going to block another 5 or 6% or 10% of our team's capacity to deal with things that we don't know. And so build the story around this, and you would see that the business is very receptive around sort of paying back some tech debt.
Nick, I love the idea of thinking about tech debt as a loan. I'm going to use it elsewhere. And I think this bit you said about owning that narrative and using qualitative or quantitative metrics to be able to talk about and demonstrate the cost of tech debt to the organization in the long run is something that really resonates, especially as tech debt, the investment you make in tech debt typically comes at the expense of the business in terms of feature velocity or go to market. So I like the idea of basically everything you said around being strategic and helping drive predictability in the long run and quantifying that through a story and a narrative. Thank you.
I think that the first step in this process is, Smruti, and thank you for endorsement. It's convincing yourself and your team. Often we look at a piece of code or a process and we think, oh, it's not good. Let's fix it. And this is subjective. 5 different people will have 5 different opinions on that. So going back to again what you and Chris were discussing about OKRs, if you could look at that problem and distill it into the impact analysis, and you are convinced that okay, this is a right cost that we are bearing, and this will compound as we go along. That's the key. It convinces you, it convinces your management, and then you go and convince the stakeholders. So it starts there.
Nick, I was going to ask you, I think that was a great kind of coverage of looking at tech debt. In terms of how you view it and this kind of interest that that gets compounded over time, do you ever look at it from the kind of forward-looking view around the opportunity cost or the cost of delay of not being able to innovate and do certain things? Like we've all got a repo or a product or a code base that no one wants to touch because they know how flaky it is. It's lacking automation, whatever it might be. But does that then stifle innovation? And do you ever look at that from a kind of measurement perspective to add further weight to the argument?
Yes, we do. So whenever we look at tech debt, we are always thinking in the let me just take a step back. It is very rare for teams in Amazon to take unconscious, unacknowledged tech debt. When we take tech debt, we call it out. When we basically say, look, this is the opportunity cost. If we do it this way, we will delay the customer delight feature by X months. So we are not going to do that. We will do it this way. Some of it is conscious decision driven by team. Some of it is regulatory. We might have to support a partner. So I work for Prime Video. And if there's a partner who wants to launch a particular offering on October 1st, we have to be ready by October 1st. So what we do, Chris, is as we take on that conscious decision about taking that shortcut or borrowing or taking that loan, we bake it into our roadmap. And this is where the we don't know part comes in. We bake it into our roadmap that as the fast follow of this delivery, we will go and fix it. And here is why. So we look at the opportunity cost, but then we also make a plan upfront to fix it going down in the year. And if we are over our 5% or 6% block of the unknown tech debt, we will simply roll it forward to the next year. And then that will then become the part of the known tech debt going forward in next year that we will prioritize and fix in our 10% capacity. So and this juggernaut keeps rolling. That's how we do it.
Nice, thank you.
That's quite interesting. So essentially, whenever you're taking a tech debt, you know that you're taking it, and
yes,
it's not unconscious. Yeah, that's really interesting.
Mostly, and my experience of working with teams inside outside Amazon is when teams take tech debt, when they borrow to expedite delivery, they know. They know. And if they don't know, it's not tech debt, it's just ignorance. And that is the unintentional thing that blows up in our face sort of few months down. But it's almost always known, unless it is inherited, unless where you take over a new team or a new system, you're coming in fresh and you didn't know anything about it. That is the only point where I think unintentional tech debt comes in. But at the point tech debt was taken by the original authors of that piece, it's known. That's been my experience.
Wow, that's really interesting. Great, thanks for that, Nick. And actually, just to pull you into the discussion, Chris, just a follow-on question to that. I think one of the audience also asked that question. So how do you convince your business stakeholders to devote time to engineering metrics in general, right? So not just tech debt now. Now let's go wider. So how do you convince them to look at engineering metrics other than tech debt, For example, automation, CI/CD, DevOps, other things, yeah.
So I think going back to kind of drawing a little bit of what Nick was saying earlier, I think for me, there's a few kind of base things that you need to understand about your business, about your product, before you can kind of make the case to business stakeholders. So the first thing is kind of what's the stage of growth of the company? So if you're a very early stage startup, then it's probably less important. It's all about, if you haven't even got product market fit, then those things are kind of less important. As you kind of hit the scale up phase, which is, Immersive Labs who I'm working for now, kind of in this phase at the moment, you need to think about a transition and this shift towards kind of engineering excellence, really focus on stability, security, and scalability as you go. If you get to a level of kind of customer base where actually retention becomes really important, then again, just tying into that previous point, the stability, security, and scalability of your platform becomes even more important. And then it's that balance between new customers and growing your customer base versus retention. The second thing is understanding kind of the business model that you operate and also the industry that you work in. So are you in a B2C where actually there's stability is directly attributed to revenue impact? So when I was in at Just Eat, we'd go down, if you did go down on a Friday night for say 10 minutes, you'd lose a couple of £1 million in lost revenue. You times that by 5 for actually, if you lose a customer, they never come back. So the impact was huge, right? So that uptime and prioritizing operational excellence work was incredibly high on the list. If you're in a B2B environment where actually you've got some SLAs with customers, but they're fairly light, it's maybe 99% uptime or 99.5, then actually your focus is different, and what you care about is different in terms of kind of those engineering metrics. And there's also kind of, different performance characteristics of different products. So some are really about, latency is key. Some kind of consumer apps, then actually that latency can lose you customers. Whereas if you're looking more at, say, again, maybe some business solution, maybe some reporting tooling, then actually a couple of seconds latency to load a report or do something else, that's acceptable. So you really need to understand what you're operating in and what those parameters then kind of come up from. Nick made a good point about this earlier, just talking about metrics, because you really need to understand, well, what metrics matter to you? What metrics matter to your customers? If anyone's kind of looked at like SRE, so site reliability engineering, then there's some kind of prescriptive ways that you can start thinking about this. So defining SLIs, so service level indicators that you care about. So these are the metrics that really underpin the customer experience. So they're really like user-focused metrics. You then roll those up into an SLO, so a service level objective, and that's really setting the parameters that you care about. And when you're looking at that, one of the really nice ways to look at it is via error budgets. So if anyone's familiar with that kind of concept, you're looking, so if you go above your target for an SLO, then actually you've overinvested in the kind of tech side of things. And if you're below it, you're not. And you can then translate that into like hours and minutes of downtime or whatever it might be, kind of flipping it a little bit to look at it like that. But you really want to understand, what do you care about in terms of your customer experience? What drives customer experience and how do they correlate into engineering metrics? So yeah, once you understood all of that, it's then about setting the objectives that are going to improve those metrics over time, and then being able to obviously demonstrate to business stakeholders the value of those metrics. I think if you can use data, it helps massively. So once you've got a view of those metrics, you can quantify the customer experience through those metrics. You can quantify things tangibly, like revenue impact, etc., through those metrics. Let's say that your target is 99.5 or 395 availability, but you're only hitting 99.2. If you can quantify that into a business impact, that's the best way to talk to your business stakeholders to make a case for why that investment is going to have a massive impact. I think that data, if you don't have a good view, a way to start stress testing your systems. I think load testing, performance testing is a critical part of understanding where the boundaries are of your system, where the headroom is. Certainly if you're in a high scale kind of business and you're growing really quickly, how do you get ahead of the number of new customers coming on the platform? And I think if you've got a really good kind of automated set of load tests that you're running on a regular basis with 2, 3, 4 times load, whatever you think is appropriate, then you can start making technical decisions now that are going to support you in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, 12 months' time. And ultimately, if the platform cannot scale to the customers as they're being brought on board, I don't think any business stakeholder would be happy with that. So again, you're talking about a lot of and I think when I always think about kind of engineering work versus product work, there's only one backlog. Like there's only one backlog for a team. It's all product work. Ultimately, the benefits and the payoff from the engineering work is typically 3-6 months down the line. So it's more long-term in focus. It's not going to deliver value this sprint potentially, or it might do if you're fixing something up. But ultimately, it's about how do we stabilize the platform for 3-6 months time? How do we make ourselves go quicker in 3-6 months time? The tech debt plays a big part of that as well. So how can we get ahead of that? Because we know we're going to, the product roadmap is telling us that in 6 months, we're going to have to tackle this area. Well, we don't want to touch that in its current state. So how can we get ahead of that and support the product roadmap? So yeah, that's I've covered a few different things there, but yeah, I think using data is a really kind of key one, and quantifying that into a metric that the business can understand is like one of the best ways to get buy-in for that engineering work. But I think you really need to understand where you are to start with. So how much effort do you invest? And it will differ and it will transition over time. So early stage startup, moving through the stages to scale up and then into maturity, that's when it does start to transition and things become different. More process starts to come in. You need to think about things. Your monitoring and observability gets better. You might have an on-call process that you need to start bringing in to support things out of hours. Like all of these things start to mature together, and it's a transition that you make. You suddenly don't decide one day, right, we need to be reliable today. It kind of happens gradually over time.
Plus one to everything you said, Chris, especially around the bit about measuring and quantifying the right set of metrics to be able to determine value to the business. I've had two different experiences. I at Stripe lead Leap engineering, which is latency, efficiency, and performance. And the kind of metrics here are obviously more tangible. It's easier to measure how much you're spending on your infrastructure or how much time the customer sees when they make a request. But on the other hand, for all the infrastructure or platform kind of work, like I also lead the data infrastructure side of things. And here are some of the inherent qualities or principles from the platform or that the internal users require are security, reliability, availability, and leverage in terms of product enablement, which then enables Stripe's users. And here, identifying the right set of metrics for infrastructure kind of work has been a challenge in terms of how do you communicate to the business, especially as your internal user cohorts vary within the company itself. And that's something we still sort of work in progress and trying to see what we can leverage from Leap. Because what I've historically seen is it's easier to have metrics when you're building products in terms of customer experience and translating that to your customers being your internal customers or treating your internal users as customers is slightly harder when you're building out infrastructure or platforms.
Smruti, what you said is very interesting, and it reminds me of a conversation I was having with keeping these sort of things a bit confidential with someone from Google, actually, who does similar role that you're doing for Stripe, and they were articulating similar sort of challenges and things that you were alluding to. And then what happened earlier on? I think it was earlier in 2020 or somewhere in 2019. GCP, the Google Cloud Platform, suffered a massive outage. And so when that happened, suddenly all of that conversation stopped. And it was all about, right, you are the most important person in Google right now. How do we fix this? How do we set this? So I think leveraging, so what he was sort of explaining to me back then was that, which is something that I actually believe in as well. Every disaster is an opportunity. And so we just need to be able to spin it that way. And so there was a massive sort of platformization effort after that, which they drove on the back of this very sort of public incident. So I can speak about the public incident because that happened and it was public and news. Amazon suffers those as well. Obviously, not to just pick up on Google. I think we had one in November last year.
I think Amazon does excellent in terms of sharing.
I tell you what, so I was listening to this conversation between Chris and yourself, and I was absolutely fascinated. Because the world within Amazon is quite sort of different from this world that I was very fascinatingly listening about. Within Amazon, we are paranoid about everything when it comes to engineering metrics, whether it's latencies, whether it's availability, whether it's error rate, kind of exceptions. We are paranoid. We routinely do game days where we would. It's very structured. We would generate load internally. We would replay production traffic 10 times on our services. We would do gremlins. I know Netflix is famous, and I cheekily say that Netflix is famous because we don't like to show off. But we do all of that what Netflix does, but with a paranoid passion. So for me, these conversations were very interesting because the mental model we have at Amazon is it's a given. It's a given that we will do it and we will have to do it. And that's the way of the world. That's how world works. So to hear Chris explain how you convince business stakeholders was very interesting for me. Thanks, Chris. Thanks a lot.
No worries. I think one of the things that I try and avoid is reactively doing engineering work because you've had a major incident and a major outage. You see it all the time. Like you were just saying, Nick, there's something happens, like whether it's a region failure in AWS, whether it's something else, but something big happens that takes the site down or products down for whatever length of time. And then that's it. Everyone jumps in. You maybe spin up some teams to do this work. I would much prefer that we have the conversation. We have the understanding of our own weaknesses in our platform, and we can plan ahead for that. And that engineering work, so it's not, because as soon as the shit hits the fan, pardon my French, then yeah, everyone knows that it's the highest priority. All the business stakeholders are like, fine, yeah, go fix that. But I'd love to be, you have this consistent roadmap, you have this vision, you have this strategy that is continually evolving the platform as you continue to scale. That's obviously the utopian vision that I try to aim for if possible.
No, I agree. And I can tell you this hand on my heart. So this morning I was woken up at 4 a.m. because one of our metrics spiked. And I think my engineers who was on call, his phone died. So the page got escalated to me. So I woke up at 4 a.m., bleary-eyed, rubbing my eyes, looking at the graph, like, what's going on? And by the time I woke myself up, the alarm had come back to normal. So literally for one data point, I woke up at 4 a.m. and now I'm up. What do I do? I start sending emails and I paged another engineer, say, can you come online and help me just validate whether we are paranoid about these things, right? So, and if I hadn't woken up, the page would have escalated to my manager, his manager, all the way up, which actually happened in 2019, but that's a different story. So
Nick, that is probably why Amazon is also notorious for work-life balance.
Yeah. So here's the thing, right? Because I was up at 4 a.m., I don't have to start my day at 9. I can now pace my day out. And honestly, I had a one-on-one with our manager at
Hello.
and he was saying, why don't you clock off early? And I said, no, I'm speaking on this engineering panel, so I can't clock off early. So I know you said it tongue in cheek, but honestly, Amazon gets a lot of bad rep. Then the reality, I work 9 to 6 with a 1-hour lunch break every single day. And I don't work after 6 unless I'm paged, which is fair enough. It happens once in a few months. That's okay.
It's a great way to humble brag, Nick, right? So we don't need to convince business stakeholders. We do it anyway. Yeah, great answer.
Nicely done, Nick. Nicely done.
Cool. So yeah, now let's come to slightly people side of things, right? So as Chris said, we love people more than the technology, right? So Smruti, you're really passionate about people, about mentoring them, coaching them, right? So essentially, how do you manage, suppose there's a low performing team member within your team who is low performing, but he or she, they don't know or they don't realize that they're a low performing individual. So how do you manage that? What do you do in that case?
Oh, low performance. I have many thoughts and feelings on this one. Basically, I've been leading teams for over a decade, and I think what I've come to realize and what I've seen consistently is people, for the most part, want to grow and do their best work and thrive, right? We spend more than half our lives at work. So we want to do best, especially engineers. They want to achieve their highest potential. So then the onus is on us as managers and leaders to actually manage people and manage them effectively. So what do I mean by this? I've seen quite a few organizations where sort of managing people or people management is sort of a nice to have. Like EMs are also expected to code and design. And while the technical aspect is absolutely important to ensure that we're building the right things, to me, what it starts with is ensuring that your team is actually set up for success. And to do that, the framework I've sort of believed in and practiced and seen be very effective is this EAR framework, which I call it. Yes, it's patented. Basically, being a successful manager is a lot about listening and listening well. And applying this in terms of 3 things: explore, align, and reflect and reinforce. So what do I mean by this? When you through one-on-ones with your individuals, you want to understand what their strengths are, what their career aspirations are, what their areas of interests are. And then you club that also with what the team's on the hook for, what does the business need? And once you've done that, you sort of set up individual plans. This is the predetermining stage once you've got someone on your team. Now, in addition to that, what you want to do is when the engineer or the manager comes up with their growth plan, what needs to happen, looking at the team's vision, the OKRs, you also want to align on expectations and personal goals. For senior engineers and EMs, what I also ask is like this personal charter, something that both Chris and me talked about, which is what do your next 6 to 12 or 12 to 36 months look like, and even 5 years and beyond? And what is the impact that you want to drive for the team and org? And last but not the least, reinforcing that on an ongoing basis. Basically, how are they doing in terms of expectations from their role and level? Here, I'm going to assume that systemically, you've got something like a career framework at the company level, or like an engineering ladder where you have for different roles, different levels. Ideally, you have 2 career tracks, one for the IC track going all the way to principal engineers or fellows, and one on the management track, which probably goes all the way into directors, VPs, and GMs. And if you have those 2 tracks, being able to align on expectations for what a certain role or a level expects out of the individual is very important. And at the heart of that then is giving that constant, timely, and actionable feedback in terms of what's working well and what you also want to do, have them do more or less of. It's not important to just say, hey, good job, right? But it's about like that you showing up in that meeting, de-escalating and lining up a plan of record was something that you did really well in coming to a useful outcome is a lot better than saying, hey, good job in that meeting, right? So it comes down to how actionable, how timely, and how specific you are in terms of making sure the expectations are understood. And then rinse and repeat, right? Do it once, do it twice, do it thrice even. Because if at any point of time after that, if you still see the person not being able to show progress or get better, and you see that they're not improving, then be honest and clear and direct, right? These engineers, EMs, everyone, we're all adults here, we're all professionals. But the key, what you owe them is that honesty and clear feedback in terms of how you don't see them succeeding in spite of repeated feedback and time that you've given them. And what I've done sometimes in my past for some cases is even see if there are other roles or levels within the company that you can pivot them to, which might be a better fit, or even more engaging at times. So to sum up your question, to me, managing low performers is to sort of not get to that state where it is low performing, because the assumption is as leaders, you've sort of done all the pre-work in making sure they're focused on the right stuff. You've set expectations that they're indeed doing the right stuff and giving them the ability through tighter feedback loops to course correct if you see them not. And finally, after everything you've tried thrice and still it's not working, then be honest and open and direct with them.
Great. So essentially, you set clear expectations, you communicate with them often, and if still they can't do it, then yeah, you need to have a conversation with them. Makes sense?
I think one of the
right, the ear framework that I call it, because it's listening. It's all about listening and communicating.
Love that.
I think I was going to say, I think that was great, Smruti. I'm fully on board with all of that. And yeah, try and adopt similar kind of ways of working with the people that work for me. I think one of the things I've seen can work well, depending on the individual, is so where you have your framework, you should have a nice career framework for the IC and your manager track. If that's then overlaid with some specific kind of skills and competencies that you would expect for the different levels of engineer, for example, and get them to do a self-assessment. Get them to say, okay, I'm a mid-level, I'm a senior engineer, and these are all the things that we expect, and can be quite granular depending on the team or the organization you're working for. If they do a self-assessment and they go through and say, okay, do I always exhibit this? Do I sometimes show it? Have I never done this? Or rate themselves on a score of 1 to 5, whatever it might be. But that self-assessment is quite interesting because if they're honest with themselves and they've taken on board the feedback that you've given them, then that will be a nice reflection, and that will actually highlight to them through that kind of bit of introspection where they need to focus, where the gaps are, how they can improve. If they inflate all those scores and actually they see themselves in a very high place compared to actually what the reality is, and you've given them the feedback to demonstrate where those gaps are, then that's a different type of conversation that you then need to have with that individual. But it can be eye-opening for the individual to go through that process and just see actually on paper, self-assessment, where the gaps are, and then how you as a manager can help them kind of fill those gaps, get the experience, build the skills.
Yeah, absolutely. We do the heat map exercise ideally every monthly or 4 to 6 weeks for every person on the team in line with what the level expects for them. So absolutely, Chris, the idea of making sure they know what their gaps are. And in fact, what they're sort of hitting out of the park, right? Areas so they can do more of that. Nick, you were saying?
No, sorry, I wasn't.
Great. So Nick, coming to you, and again giving you a chance to talk about work-life balance. So how do you manage burnout at Amazon, right? So at Amazon, we assume that everyone is really high-performing engineer, right? Otherwise, you won't get hired at Amazon in the first place. So in these situations, and especially in the lockdown and COVID and all these things, how do you manage the burnout?
It's an interesting question. And I think I'll go back to something that Smruti said earlier on in this conversation, which is, defining the concept of growth, and sort of working with people so that they understand what they're working towards. I think there's an old cliche, right? When you're doing what you love, it doesn't feel like work. So the key there is to align people's work around their superpowers and what they love and what their idea of growth is. And as long as you do that, you would see a lot of voluntary sort of stepping up, voluntary sort of extending beyond their normal duty and going above and beyond the line of call of duty. Um, so, but I think the key there as a manager for us sometimes at Amazon is reverse, which is we kind of have to sometimes get the people to just slow down a little and avoid the burnout. Because look, Amazon being Amazon, we attract a certain sort of a certain kind of people who have a different sort of ambition or mental model, right? People who believe in sort of pushing themselves and the boundary and the envelope towards sort of greater heights. And so when you're working with these passionate and talented and caliber people, you have to sort of play both cards, which is sometimes push, but at the other times, just let's put the brake on, guys, take a breath. It's not the end of the world. We'll do it tomorrow. And it's having that balance is crucial. uh, I think key takeaways, again, going back to what Smriti said earlier on in this conversation, make sure you've had that conversation with people as to what their superpowers are, what do they see as their growth, align their work to that ambition, and you would see that it happens. The other thing I would say, one last thought on this is what I said earlier on in this conversation, and I genuinely mean it. Um, we are all leaders, right? Lead by example. So it's important to walk the walk when you talk the talk. So when I said I work 9 to 6, I meant it, and I do that religiously. I guard my personal time. I would not want work to bleed into my sort of boundaries. And once you do that and you cultivate that culture in, you would see people would sort of take their foot off the pedal and would sort of the problem of burnout will not happen.
I think that last point, Nick, is one of the key ones. Like, people look up to the leaders to demonstrate the behaviors that they expect to see in the organization. And I think what lockdown hopefully has actually helped in a lot of ways is made all of us reevaluate kind of what's important to us. It certainly has for me. And I certainly do not work the hours that I used to work. I spend way more time with my family and with my children, and actually love the time. I love not commuting. Like, I absolutely love not commuting. I'm sure I'm not alone in loving not commuting. Twice down to London a week, 12 hours of travel was not fun. It was incredibly tiring, and it took me away from my family. So yeah, I'm absolutely with you on that. I think that's such an important point, that we do lead by example. If you're responding to emails at 1 a.m. or 2 a.m, which used to be a very common thing at Just Eat, someone would send an email at 1 o'clock, 1:30, someone would respond. And you're like, this is madness. This is setting a terrible example. And it's normally the very high up people in the organization who would work their crazy hours. And it just sets that expectation. Like, this is the behavior that if you want to move up in the company, you need to exhibit. And that's just incredibly dangerous. So yeah, you're spot on there, Nick.
Thank you. When we went into this lockdown, Chris, actually, I had this problem on my hands. So, a lot of young engineers who are living in London on their own in a studio or a one-bedroom flat with no company, they had nothing to do but work. So they were burning out. A lot of people were burning out voluntarily because there's nothing else that they could do. You can't go out, you can't meet anyone, you have your laptop, and so you just go head down. And so I basically started institutioning not a rule, but kind of a challenge in my team, which is you decide whether you work 9 to 6 or 10 to 7 or whatever. After that time, close down the lid of your laptop and put it in a place where you can't reach it. It could be a drawer at the end of your kitchen if you live in a studio, but your laptop should be out of your reach. So there's a physical effort for you to go down to the laptop, turn it all the way back up, connect to VPN, and then look at work, right? Don't have work on your phone. I don't have work emails on my phone. I only have my pager on my phone, which, by the way, during this call went again. And so I had to ping my own call. So when my video was off, but that is what I was doing. Hey, what's happening? I'm getting paged again.
Yeah, absolutely. +1 to what Chris and Nick said. You got to lead by example. And I think one of the tactics or things I've told my teams is please take the PTO. There's this tendency that, this COVID is going to end. And so there's this tendency for people to hoard their time for the end of the year or when it ends. But 2021 is still going to have a few quarters where things are pretty rough. And that's why I highly encourage teams to take that time off consciously and do that myself. So it sets the right example. Thanks, Nick and Chris, for that one.
Just one little thing that I've used quite effectively as well is walking one-to-ones. So get them to go out on a walk, you go out on a walk. You're not walking together in these current times, just wherever you are. But that you get the exercise, you get outside, you get to think, and it's just quite a nice way to then just focus on the conversation with the person. So I found that's quite an effective, and that helps them, that helps you.
My skip level tried to do that with me in December. He said, let's do this. So he's my skip, fairly high, fairly senior person now. And he said, hey, you're 101. What do you think? Let's go out for a walk. You walk and I walk, and we'll have a 101. And I went, nah. If we were together, that's a different story. But you're walking around where you live. I'm walking around where I live. Headphones in the air. I'd sit on my desk.
I think it depends on the relationship that you've already established. I think for one-on-ones, which you're having more frequently and you know each other, I think not having video sort of works. But like you said, Nick, if you're meeting someone once in 6 months or once in 9, it gets harder to just sort of walk without the video. But curious to hear how it's worked for others.
Hello.
Correct?
Yeah, I think we lost Smruti.
No, she's
Oh,
here.
she's here.
Yeah. Hey, Smruti.
Sorry, had an internet issue.
Sorry, you were saying something and I think you got cut off in between.
No, all good.
Great. So I think we are almost running out of time now. So do you guys have any final comments before we finish? Any of you?
I'd actually open it up to our audience and see if someone had any comment or any pearls of wisdom they'd share with us.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Let's bring them in. So make sure that you have your mic, everyone, and go ahead with the questions.
Smruti needs to leave. So Smruti,
sorry,
thanks
I got to
for
drop off, but
the
happy to
discussion
catch
and
some
great having
questions
you on the panel. Yeah.
Sorry, Gaurang.
Definitely,
Happy to
yeah.
catch questions on the Slack channel later. Thanks.
Yeah. We'll send it to you.
Bye, Smruti.
Thanks, Smruti.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask it.
Hello. Hi, I actually have a question. I was really interested with the recalibration conversation that one of the panels was talking about earlier, where they rate themselves on like where they see themselves based on seniority. Because I do something similar, but like how I go about it is I ask them to rate themselves as red, amber, green. Sorry. One sec. Yeah, as red, amber, green. And I'm curious how, because I've experienced it where there's no alignment between where they think they are and where I think they are. So I'm curious how one of your conversations went with that, and like what plan did you come up with your direct report when there's misalignment on how they calibrate themselves as opposed to like what you think on where they are at.
So it can be difficult. Especially if there's a fairly big disparity. Let's say you've marked them as red, they've marked themselves as green. yeah, that is a fairly big disparity. I think ultimately through, you need to have the conversation with them. You need to dig into the details. You need to understand the reasons why they would put themselves as a lot higher. Now, there may be some things actually where you have someone who is very self-deprecating and they put themselves low across everything, but actually you think they're higher. So it can be a positive conversation as well as a more harder conversation. Yeah, those harder conversations aren't easy. Going back to what Smruti was saying earlier, that there has to be some feedback to back that up. Like there has to be a specific example of where they either haven't demonstrated that skill or that behavior. Maybe there's some pull requests that you can refer to, and there's some comments on there that just demonstrate that they haven't necessarily grasped this aspect of what you're talking about. Or there's some code that they've pushed to production and it maybe hasn't gone through the process the right way and it's very buggy. And if you can get data or specific examples, then they have no defense against that. If it comes to that. But I think if you have a really trusted relationship with all of the guys on your team, it's easier. If you don't have that trust, if you don't have a relationship, that open relationship, then it is harder. Because it feels like you're going to have to tell them, well, no, I'm actually putting you here. You think you're here, but I'm putting you here for these reasons, but I'm putting you here. And then, yeah, that can obviously lead to kind of disengagement and other issues with that individual. But yeah, it's a conversation worth having, because delusions of grandeur and thinking that people are above where they are in certain skills, that's not helpful for them in the long term. If they think they're already an expert at something, they're not going to try to improve it. So it is a conversation you need to have, no matter how difficult that conversation may be.
Yeah, right.
With everything that Chris said, I would only say one thing, that this should not be a surprise conversation at the end of the year. So if there's a pattern with a particular person, this coaching, this feedback, this conversation should happen throughout sort of months and months, weeks and weeks, just so that they're aware of the problems that you're facing and they have a chance to rectify some of them. It shouldn't come as a surprise at the end.
It's actually an interesting one, because my follow-up question to that is like, how often do you do this? Because I'm trying to find the balance of, because like I do my one-to-ones almost every 2 weeks. So it means that like, if I do this monthly, I'll be recalibrating with them every month. And sometimes it's a bit much. So I'm trying to find like the right, what do you call this? The right amount.
Calibrate every month. What you do every month is, the best feedback is given right as close to the incident as possible. So if there's a particular incident you spotted, a particular miss by a particular person, whether it's in a code base or handling off a customer issue or anything, right? Make out time within that week or in your next one-on-one to talk about that specific incident, just so they are aware that this was a miss, and outline your expectation on how you would have liked to see them handle it or manage it or write that code. So they have that point in time feedback, which is fresh, very relevant to the incident that happened. And then they have a chance to sort of digest that, have a discussion with you in your next one-on-one. If they disagreed with you, or come back to you and say, yep, you know what you said makes sense. I've made a note and I'll keep that in mind. Just so it's not to calibrate them at that point, but to sort of start flagging these concerns earlier on, so that they have a chance to either sort of disprove your assertion or agree with it and have a real shot at fixing it.
I would say, going to a question on cadence, Paolo, I'd say the kind of minimum cadence that I would opt for in terms of doing that calibration, that assessment, would be quarterly. I think if you're working with the engineers in your team and you're setting them goals, typically the time frame for those is going to be a quarter. It may even be longer term, depending on what they're actually working towards and the steps to get there, how big the goal is. So yeah, it doesn't really make sense. I wouldn't say to do it kind of on a monthly or 6 weekly basis. I know Smruti was saying kind of every 6 weeks, but I would opt for kind of quarterly at a minimum, maybe 6 monthly, depending on the learning that they need to do and where they're going. So yeah, but to Nick's point, the feedback that's the thing that will drive it. That will drive those specific bits of improvement alongside a kind of clear learning plan of other stuff that they're doing to elevate their game in certain areas as well.
Yeah, definitely agree on like timely feedback. Thanks for the answers.
Great. Any other questions?
Yeah, I might have one. First of all, thank you so much, Nick and Chris, for sharing all the valuable knowledge. As we're talking about low performers, and we've talked a lot about kind of how to handle it, what's your normal approaches to identify low performers?
Is that for Chris or for myself?
Yeah, whoever takes it first.
Okay, so it starts again. The performance is I think it's opening a bit of a can of worms. It's a meta question, and it all goes back to OKRs and how do you set objective goals and how do you sort of track and demonstrate those goals and whether someone is meeting those or not. So there are two aspects of performance. So one, if you're setting objective goals and a person is not meeting those goals, then that person by definition is not performing well and either needs a course correction in their goals or a new direction, or what Smruti was alluding to earlier, an internal mobility sort of opportunity for them to shine in a different area where they're strong at. So that, or performance could be relative. So when you look at your entire team and you say, okay, you know what, everyone's meeting their goals, but these 5 people are sort of stretching it beyond and going above and beyond the call of duty. So compared to them, this person is a low performer. But that's a very dangerous road to take.
Oh,
This is comparative performance. But identifying low performers, goal-driven, objective-driven, incident-driven, feedback, point in time. That's how you identify low performers.
Yeah, I'd kind of add a few things that I would do to kind of try and get a better understanding of performance of individuals, but also teams as well. So I think that the key thing is kind of observation, whether that's observation through team ceremonies, whether that's communication via Slack, whether that's communication via email, whether that's code commits they're doing. Like it's observation and just being aware of the work that person is doing. And it's not just about cutting code, it's about how they interact with the rest of the team. And that comes through in team meetings and the kind of offline async messaging as well. I think data can be used to help with some of these things more at a team level. I don't like data on like specific individuals, but it can be a good indicator where you do have an issue, whether that's looking at some of the agile metrics, going back to some of Gaurang's and Antonio's favorite DevOps metrics from Accelerate, looking at those 4 key metrics there. I think some of those things can be good indicators, more, like I said, more at the team level. I think one-to-ones are a great way to really dig into some issues as well with individuals. There may be some indicators through those one-to-ones that they're not happy about something, or something is going on in their life that's actually impacting them. So it's understanding the context within which they're working as well is like super important. And then obviously through speaking to their peers. So either both inside and outside the team, you should hopefully be having conversations, less so in the remote setup, but if you can manufacture those conversations to get that feedback directly about an individual, then you can hopefully make a well-rounded, informed decision about who's performing well and who's not. And then you have some concrete data as well to kind of back up the conversations.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks for the answers, Chris and Nick. I think we are running out of time now, and it's a Friday and people are leaving. So I guess we should wrap this up, right? Antonio, do you have any closing remarks?
I've got no follow-up questions or closing remarks. I just want to say a big thank you for our panelists. They've been amazing. And also thank you so much to all the engineering managers who joined us. I've had a lot of messages on Slack, direct messages asking whether this was recorded, because a lot of them could not make it this week. A lot of them is actually first week back at work, so they're asking for me to send it early next week. It's been a great discussion, and also Gaurang mentioned earlier the roundtable discussions. We've got quite a few this month. A couple of them are already full, but there will be more and more as from February. So yeah, nothing else to add apart from it's been a fantastic session. Very, very good.
Great. Thank you, everyone, and have a nice weekend.
Thank you, Gaurang.
Thank you
so much.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much.
Cheers, guys. Have a good weekend.
Take care.
Cheers, bye.
Thanks.
Cheers.